All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jomo Stewart, Mr. Roger Burgraff, here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation. I believe the date is December 6th. It is right after 8 o'clock in the AM, and we're here for the Energy for All Alaska Task Force meeting. Our guest this morning is Mr. Nolan Klouda. He is the Executive Director of the Alaska Center for Economic Development there at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. But of course, serving our entire state with top flight economic analysis and economic development services. So recently, it was reported in the papers that CED had done a comparative analysis of Alaska's economic performance relative to other jurisdictions, which is to say other states. And I thought it would be interesting for the group to get a little bit deeper dive on that report and our status, again, relative to COVID economic recovery relative to other jurisdictions. Also, recently, there's, in fact, I believe it's today, there's a story in the ADN, the Anchorage Daily News, that discusses wages. And I'll let Nolan, if he wants me to navigate to it. I actually already knew they existed, but there's some really neat comparative reports of economic data relative to house districts that also include information relative to wages. Again, just one more of the great offerings from our friends at Alaska CED. But I won't steal his thunder. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Executive Director Klouda. Good morning, Nolan.
Good morning, Jomo. Yeah, thanks for having me on this morning. I direct the Center for Economic Development, at CED, and we spend our time, we kind of divide our focus in terms of economic development related applied research, trying to look at what's going on with the state economy and deriving insights from that might be useful in some way. But also we do a lot of economic development planning work, like strategic planning, and a lot of entrepreneurship development too, including training programs for startup companies. So we have our hands in all kinds of interesting areas. And so we like our research to be doing something that's useful, as far and that helps to suggest action, in the economy. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share and walk you guys through some slides that I've got. Everybody see that okay? All right, very good. So, I get we live in the kind of this weird time where it's sort of ambiguous whether the economy, and I'm talking nationally, but also within the state, where it's hard to kind of tell, like, is the economy doing really, really good, or is it doing really bad? Or it seems like we're teetering on the brink of something, and we've been teetering on the brink of like a post-pandemic, recession that hasn't quite materialized, and the indicators look good, but at the same time, there's a lot of anxiety in the air. And what is all this about? And we have this kind of situation where a lot of our like economic indicators overall, nationally, are kind of redlining in good directions and redlining in bad directions at the same time, right? So we see that employment keeps growing, in state to some degree, but especially nationally, very, very, very low unemployment. We're looking at record low unemployment, both in Alaska and nationally. There are not that many people who can't find a job, right? Consumers are spending well. There's lots of money circulating. A lot of things look good. But then on the other hand, we have the issue of inflation, the highest inflation in 40 years, right? We have these labor shortages that are crippling to so many businesses. We have the housing costs, in this crazy housing market, which is cooling off a bit, but still way high. Prices are still way high compared to what they were before the pandemic, and they really shot up fast at that time. And then also the GDP at the national level seems to be is kind of wavered between shrinking and being just very flat. And so it leaves us, and if you look at surveys, a lot of people think maybe we're already in a recession or we're clearly headed to one, but then at the same time, we have all these growth measures. So it's kind of this weird ambiguous picture, right? So what we wanted to do though with this report is a very simple report. I think it's something like 8 or 9 pages. I don't even remember which, but we wanted to look at a couple of different measures, zeroed in on Alaska, but also compared to the whole all 50 states plus DC plus the national economy, and look at a period of time like how did Alaska really do? during that time, and really put things in context. I spend a lot of time with data on the economy, and it's nothing new to me to see that Alaska has been trailing on a lot of indicators compared to the national average for several years. But I think that we wanted to really stack it up against all other states and see like how are we really doing on several different measures. And so that's what this report is. It came out a couple of weeks ago. We called it Alaska's Economic Performance in National Context. As soon as we put this out, I got an immediate call from Alex DeMarbin at the ADN, wanted to run a story on it. They ended up doing the front page of the paper with some of the graphs that we had in there that show all the states stacked up with Alaska at the very bottom. But what we did is we wanted to take a time period 2015 to 2022, and it's kind of broken up into like two chunks mainly. And 2015 is when Alaska's employment was at its all-time high. We've never had the number of jobs that we had in 2015, so I use that as a benchmark. And then we looked at employment especially employment growth, unemployment as an average over that time, GDP, gross domestic product, the kind of the headline measure for how an economy is doing, and then the net migration rate, how many people are either leaving or coming as a proportion of the population. And then we also wanted to zero in a little bit on the COVID recovery portion, the 2020 to 2022 part of it, like how are we doing since COVID, and what is that recovery looking like? So to walk you through the major pieces, we looked at how, overall how Alaska's in a big picture way, how does employment growth in Alaska compared to the U.S. as a whole? This is where they're indexed so that they're on the same scale. The U.S. from 2015 to the present. The U.S. from 2015, right up until the COVID pandemic was enjoying this really nice long expansion. With low unemployment rates, new jobs being added, pretty strong economic growth during that whole time. Well, that whole time was a really bad spot for Alaska's economy. We were actually losing employment for much of that time, and then even from 2015 to 2018 especially, and then even when we stopped losing employment, we stayed pretty flat. We haven't done anything that would suggest we're going to get back to the employment levels we had before. Then we all had the same pandemic crash. It happened in Alaska just like everywhere else. And then our recovery since the pandemic, you can see the harsh crash, it stands out right there. And then the recovery since the pandemic in terms of employment in Alaska has been kind of, just sort of flat and not really that impressive overall. Whereas like in the country as a whole, there's been pretty steady growth out of the pandemic low spot. So that's the big picture comparison as far as employment goes. So let's stack up all the 50 states. In the report, you can see all the states, DC and the US, on one graph for comparison. For these slides, I selected. I had to pare them down to make them viewable, but so I put the top state, and then I took a couple of states that I thought would be of interest, like Texas, Washington, California, and then I put Alaska, and then the very bottom performing state if it's not Alaska. So employment growth from 2015 to 2021, how many, what share, what the percentage of jobs added during that time. The U.S. overall gained 3% employment. That was 2021 as the ending point. The U.S. economy had grown a lot and then lost its jobs, and then had kind of partially recovered out of it by 2021. Idaho had this exemplary performance. Texas, Washington did really well. Alaska is second from the bottom on this one. We had 8% fewer jobs in 2021 than in 2015. The only state that did worse was North Dakota, which is another fellow oil producing state. Then we looking at the average unemployment rate in 2015 to 2021. This is a period of pretty low unemployment in the U.S. and mostly of falling unemployment because generally the economy got better up until 2020 or so. 5% about was the national average at that time. A couple of states that did below that, and Alaska had the second highest unemployment rate on average. Only Nevada did worse, and Nevada had experienced this horrible crash from the housing bubble, before that in the 2008 time frame. So 6.5% unemployment is not necessarily the worst rate in the world. It's not, there are times when it's been much higher, but compared to other states at the time, we were very high. And then GDP growth from 2015 to 2021, how states did here. Utah put in a fantastic performance, grew 30%. Washington grew a lot. California, much maligned, kind of a laggard in a lot of respects, did very well actually as far as growing its economic output. U.S. economy overall 12.8%. But Alaska, second from the bottom here, next to Wyoming, also another large energy producing state. So GDP, one of a number of states where GDP actually shrunk was Alaska. And then where things get really ugly is the net migration rate. This is the number. This is there's always people coming and going. Any state, we take the net number, how many people more came than went, and if it's negative, it means more people left the state. If it's positive, more people came. And this is all adjusted to the populations of each of those states. So Idaho has a big surge of in-migration going on. Idaho's been the top performing state here. A lot of Alaskans have actually, Idaho's been kind of emerged as one of the top destinations for Alaskans that are leaving the state, along with Washington and Texas and others. U.S. overall gained some population from immigration during that time, modestly. But Alaska is number 51, with this large outmigration, losing about 8.8 residents for every 1,000 in the state overall. And I do want to dwell on this. California is one you hear in the national press a lot as having this big exodus, and it's true. California is having big outmigration issues. Housing is expensive. Real estate's hard to find. The cost of living in general is expensive. California has had a lot of problems that have caused people to want to leave California, right? But we're doing worse than them. Is something that's worth keeping in mind here. So this is one where it's really where I feel like the numbers are especially depressing. Then briefly looking at just the period 2020 to 2022. So how have we done since the pandemic, basically, right? Stacked up the states this way. This is employment growth. Alaska is, there's actually a couple of states below Alaska. Hawaii is the worst one as far as how much of its employment, like the percent of its employment that it's recovered since the very beginning of 2020. US overall has just about recovered its employment from before the pandemic to now. So if that 100 line there is that's like breaking even. That means you lost a bunch of jobs, and then if you found your way back to that line, you've recovered everything you lost during the pandemic. Idaho again is actually recovered from the pandemic and has even got more jobs than it had before it. But Alaska is down by several percentage points, still below the pre-pandemic levels. So then GDP growth, Alaska is from the beginning of 2020 until the second quarter of 2022, which was the latest data that I had. Alaska's actually got the lowest GDP performance of any state here in that time. So you stack it all up, and then and Alaska is on all four of these measures. Alaska is second from the bottom. Yeah, go ahead.
Nolan, I'm sorry, I couldn't get to the unmute button fast enough. Can you go back to the last slide?
Yeah.
Can we talk just a little bit about what factors into GDP?
Yeah. So GDP is sort of like the gross value of the economy. It's the sum total of it. Here's a really simple way to think about it: is the sum total of all the income earned in the state at that time, that personal earnings and corporate business earnings. And so it's kind of like the headline way of measuring an economy. It's not. I don't necessarily think of it as a perfect measure, like at a state level. It can be pretty sensitive to factors like oil production seems to really move it around a lot. But GDP is think of that as our total gross income as a state.
Okay, and actually, can we jump back one to employment or unemployment?
To this
Thank
one?
you. Yes. Can you speak just a little bit about when we talk about employment and unemployment, say on a benefits basis? It has a definition associated with it that doesn't necessarily reflect whether or not you're in the workforce. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, this one's employment, so the number of jobs that are being added, but unemployment does have a definition. It means that you're available and seeking work, but don't currently have a job. And so yeah, and be filing for unemployment claims. You have to meet those conditions, right? You have to be actively searching for a job and certifying that you're searching, right? In order to get whatever unemployment benefits are available. And there are imperfections to measuring unemployment because people who have part-time work, who want full-time work, or people who have dropped out of the labor force are not counted in it.
Okay, but again, when we're talking this number, employment, we are talking about, again, jobs available and on offer.
Yeah, these are jobs that are filled.
And filled. Okay.
Yeah, these are jobs where there's a W-2 associated with them. They derive this information from an actual count of companies' payroll.
Okay. I would just remind everyone, again, this is for our mutual benefit. Nolan's cooking in this presentation, but again, we're here for you. So if you have any questions, please know that you can go ahead and throw up your hand there on the chat box, or you may simply unmute and fire away. Thanks, Nolan.
Yeah, and I love to answer questions as we go along too. So feel free. So let's see, and then recapping. We're second from the bottom on all these measures. It's out of 51 because we counted DC in there too. So that's why it is. So we're 50th on GDP, employment and unemployment, and 51st on net migration. And then when you look at the 2020-2022, the COVID recovery period, we're dead last on GDP growth, and then 48th for employment and unemployment rate as far as where we stack up. So it speaks to us having I would hope that we would be doing a little bit better coming out of COVID. I certainly would, but I think that we had a weak economy going into COVID, and then coming out of it, it seems like that trend does continue. Is what we're observing so far. Doesn't mean that we're locked into that and that things won't change, but that's the trajectory right now. So to take a pause for a second, and actually, and this goes along with what that ADN article that Jomo posted earlier. Are we really doing? Is it really as bad as it looks? Because I've often felt like I'm definitely the bearer of bad news a lot lately when it comes to the economy, because there's a lot of I talked about there's good reasons to be optimistic of the national economy overall, but the Alaska economy has been kind of making me a little queasy lately. But there are some upsides to how we're doing that aren't captured in some of these numbers, and part of it is that it's not only that we did horribly during this time, it's that the U.S. economy and most other states were doing really well. So us being underperforming really widened the gap between us, right? Like if we didn't necessarily have super high unemployment rates, but they were the highest in the country, or close to the highest in the country, right? And also that there hasn't necessarily been, when I say we haven't felt much economic pain, of course there are many people experiencing economic hardship, but we didn't have the same kind of crash like we had in the 80s, where there was a sudden spike in people getting their homes foreclosed. We didn't have these mass layoff events. We mostly lost employment in kind of an attritional way, of jobs not getting refilled when they're empty, or of small scale job losses, and of people leaving the state as they lost their job and not necessarily contributing to a large pool of unemployed people here in Alaska because there's a good job market elsewhere. And Alaska also looks better on other kinds of measures. What I looked at was that how we're doing over time in these measures, right? The 2015 to 2022 time frame. But if you look at us like at any point in time, we don't really have. Alaska does not have an especially high poverty rate. Of course, we have poverty, but we don't have a high poverty rate, and it didn't really go up in this time. We do have pretty high GDP per capita. So in other words, the typical income in Alaska is pretty high still, and we still have pretty high wages. Although we have definitely lost some of that Alaska wage premium that we used to really count on. Household income is still pretty high though compared to the national average, and we have higher cost of living, so we need that higher average income. So in some ways, what it looks like to me is sort of this slow the sort of slow loss of a lot of economic vitality, and not a very sudden and dramatic one. And that has its own dangers, the kind of boiling frog type of syndrome where we don't necessarily see the urgency of needing to fix our economy, so we leave things as they are. But meanwhile, things get gradually worse over time. And so that's me kind of editorializing our situation. And
Actually, hey, Nolan, we do have a question in the chat.
yeah, oh yeah, Juliet.
We
Let's
know
see.
we know the employment growth rate, jobs at W-2s is not the most accurate indicator for Alaska with all the micro businesses, and actually a lot of subsistence activities as well. Do you have any comparative info for businesses for this same period?
Well, W-2, employment from the payroll system that we get from Department of Labor and BLS are the best data that is going to be available to measure what we're trying to measure, and it's imperfect in the ways that no indicator is going to be perfect, but it is a very good measure overall. There is data out there about micro businesses, but it's a very, very noisy and messy set of data that's hard to derive solid conclusions from, and it's not updated very frequently at all. It's a census data set, the non-employers, and it's usually lags by about 2 years, sometimes 3 years, and so we unfortunately we don't have a good way of patching it in. I would add that when we're talking about especially about the borough employment, that it doesn't include military personnel, which are a huge part of the local economy, and that is something that is an omission, but not something we can do much about, unfortunately, as far as the data goes.
Thanks.
Let's see. I did have a little bit of. I've given a lot of talks about the labor shortage, but I'm not going to go way into that. But I did want to talk a little bit about some of the causes of the labor shortage that you're seeing, because I think this is really affecting us. But aging and retirements is a big part of it. Immigration restrictions is another one. But I usually like to say a little bit about our outmigration trend, as far as something that's making our workforce smaller overall as a state, that continues to shrink it. And this is the net migration for Alaska since going back to 2009, 2010. You can see all the red bars means more people leaving than coming. We have 9 years of outmigration solid in Alaska, and now at this point, almost a decade of more people leaving the state than coming to it. And I did throw in how that looks for the Fairbanks North Star Borough, which this little blue bar at the end here is always refreshing to see when you're looking at a sea of red. But because I think this is probably mostly related to the F-35 bed down into Eielson, but Fairbanks is one of the only big population centers in the state that has a positive rate in the last year. So I assume that's all because of Jomo's efforts. But I'd like to say a little bit on migration and age, because one of the challenges that we're having in the state that I think is contributing to a lot of our problems is that we have a lot of young people leaving. And so this is what migration looked like by age group back in 2005 to 2010. If it's red to the left, more people in that age group are leaving the state. Blue to the right, more people are in that age group are arriving in the state, right? And you can see here that this is a time period when people were moving to Alaska on average, but we still had people that were in retirement years or closer to their retirement years were leaving the state overall, and that's an old time-honored trend of moving to Palm Springs or to the Phoenix area or whatever. But we were still drawing a lot of prime age workers into the state during that time, and especially people in their 20s, 30s, 40s. Also, many of them seeming to have young families with them too. And then in 2010 to 2015 started skewing a bit more negative, but we were still attracting people in their 20s and 30s to the state overall. So this is when things were turning. But then if you really see what it looks like now, it's just that all age groups are leaving the state on net overall. And so So that's sort of what the what the numbers look like. So this is I think one of the I think this deserves to be framed as our major challenge to find a way to reverse in the state. I think that we need to think really hard about what it is that causes people to leave or to not see opportunity in Alaska, and to try to address that. And it's not a simple problem, I think, to solve, but it is a pretty urgent one. There's this really excellent website, migrationpatterns.org, where you can look at it. It's got an interactive map of the whole U.S., and you can click on like individual locations on the map, and then you can see where young people that are from that community, where they're now living. And so they look at people when they're 16 years old, where they live, and then when they're 26 years old, where they're living. And so this one I pulled up for Fairbanks. People who were 16-year-olds who lived in Fairbanks, where are they living now that they're 26? And 54% still live in the Fairbanks area. And this is the broader area. It's not just the community itself. 11% live elsewhere in Alaska, and then 35% left the state. And so I thought that was something that might be interesting to share as well. The top places being Seattle, Portland, Phoenix, Los Angeles, Denver. These are probably not too surprising as far as destinations. We all know people who have moved to these places. It looks similar. When I pulled up other cities in Alaska, it actually looks pretty similar. About 35% leaving the state is typical. In Anchorage, we don't have as many people that move elsewhere in Alaska, but we have just about the same percent that eventually leave the state. So
actually, Nolan,
yeah, go
before
ahead.
we leave that slide, just to repeat, because I was trying to pull the website. So what is this telling me? Areas in Alaska. So if people are leaving Fairbanks, this is where they're going.
Yeah. So this is of all the people who were who lived in Fairbanks when they were 16. Now that they're 26, where do they live? And
okay.
This is a graph of that, basically.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So 54% are still in Fairbanks, more than half.
The good half.
Better half, right? So then, what are the things that can be done about outmigration, which affects like a lot of our other economic problems? I think that housing, the housing situation in the state has been a very big problem. I really have watched what the Fairbanks North Star Borough has done, and what probably many of you have been involved in with encouraging more housing. For the Eielson families to get built, especially more multifamily housing, and the incentives with property tax abatement and things like that. I think that's been a good model for other communities to follow in the state. Anchorage and Juneau have implemented similar, rental housing property tax abatements as well. But I think that fixing the housing problem that we've had in the state, where we just haven't had enough getting built overall, enough single family, enough multifamily, enough of a good mix of affordability ranges for people. That's been a real problem in the state that really overall historically has probably not received enough attention. The quality of life investments, the amenities, the trails, the entertainment, the fun things to do, the cool downtown or town center type spaces. I think those are important things to pay attention to. Alaska has lost a lot of ground. I'm not an expert in either of these areas at all, but Alaska does not look very good on a lot of the statistics about public safety and about our school performances. And we are, and I think that the funding going towards public services, and especially for public schools right now, has really been in real terms declining. The amount of money that we're putting into schools, into education, I think, and that is something that is, if you wanted to encourage people to move out of a state, that would be the way to do it. Would be to reduce school budgets, probably. Taking advantage of remote working opportunities, drawing people to the state or allowing people to stay in the state, with remote jobs. I think that we see that it requires a lot of broadband development, a lot of upgrades that we need to see. and just the general competitiveness that we bring to with other places. So with that, I'd really love to open it up for any discussion, any thoughts that folks have to share.
Hey,
All right,
Joe.
well, I would open it up. Carl?
Yeah, if you go back to that last slide, I don't agree with that. I feel that economics is what brings people and keeps people in a state. So with all, in comparison to the lower 48, Hawaii is understandable. They have no manufacturing. The only thing they got is tourism. However, you look at other states. Now, I'm from Michigan, so auto industry is in Michigan. Now they're even talking about building a chip manufacturing there. Alaska, what does Alaska have in any type of manufacturing? In any type of manufacturing, it's geared toward the oil industry. And then the other thing is the military. I think, in my opinion, and it's just an opinion, if you have jobs, if you have a business to recruit jobs, these bullets I see on here will go away. What's your feeling on that?
I mean, I think that there is a certain amount of truth in that, but I would say it's a bit, but there's a lot more chicken and egg dynamic to the quality of life, livability, the foundation pieces, and whether you attract businesses and industry. I think, and I think it's becoming increasingly more that way. That large corporations or large businesses, when they're looking for a place, to set up their next facility or their next headquarters, they really care a lot about whether they're going to be able to attract people to work there, and whether their employees are going to be happy there. I was just with a group of folks from Alaska that went down to Oklahoma City, and Oklahoma City's gone through this big revival of new investment and kind of putting a lot into their downtown and attracting young people, and it is economically doing really well. But they had they went through the same kind of thing that we went through in the 80s. They were, an oil dependent city, saw a bad crash, and people were leaving. And this is in like the late 80s and into the early 90s. And at one point they were trying to get, I think it was American Airlines. They wanted to get a American Airlines facility there that they lost, that someone else that ended up going to another community. And what they were told by American Airlines, like, no, this place is great as far as like low costs of, it's good location in the United States, but we don't think our employees want to live here. That's the problem. And that was a wake up call to them about what they needed to do to make their city more attractive. And so I think that now that's one of the big ways that cities compete economically, and regions and states compete economically, is by being a good place to live. And so when you look at places like Texas, that are doing really well economically, or Idaho, or some of the other examples, they're places that have really good affordable housing, for instance, that's being built, that's newer stock. They have good cities, walkable areas. In a lot of cases, they have good schools too. And so there's a give and take there. I think in the past, what we've done in Alaska is we've had these big booms, the pipeline and the oil money flows, there's so much money coming in that it lets us overcome like a lot of our quality of life challenges, or a lot of our expensive cost of living. You can kind of throw money at those problems for a time being. But I think that I don't see a force coming on the horizon that'll improve that. And when you talk about things like the military, I don't think I need to tell this group that, but isn't the military concerned about how their personnel are enjoying living in a place when they're assigned there, right? Don't they also want trails and good schools? And I mean, doesn't the Air Force rate communities on the quality of their schools when they're thinking about basing decisions and so forth? So I think that there is an influence there.
But Nolan, again, compared to the lower 48, we have our challenges. High cost of energy.
Absolutely.
It's huge. And again, you talked about the 52% that live here are I can say they want to live here because they enjoy the area we live in. So how do you then recruit people to say, hey, look, you know, we live in Fairbanks and we love Fairbanks. And when we leave Fairbanks, we can't wait to get back to Fairbanks. So, you know, attitude and word of mouth, I don't know. I just feel that if you have good housing, it does you no good if you don't have a job.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. And I think yeah, I mean there's a lot of there's definitely a lot of ways you can dig into it and look at it. But I would argue though that good foundational elements that make a place attractive make it much easier for businesses to also invest and to expand there too. So there's a lot of chicken and egg and a lot of give and take there as far
Well,
as
let me ask you this, Nolan.
Hey,
So,
Carl. Hey, Carl.
one
Do you
more
mind if I
question.
ask Hey, Carl, do you mind if I ask a question?
I got one more question. I'll cut myself off.
Okay, Carl.
Alaska is an isolated area compared to the lower 48. What did it take for those folks to go to Idaho? What attracted the folks to Idaho that aren't attracted to Alaska?
that's a whole question I can't quite answer. I think, I mean, there's so much that goes into a person's decision to move, I think. But what we can tell at a very high level, I think that housing availability and affordability and good quality stock like that's a big factor. People who have kids, they're going to care a lot about the quality of the schools, and they're not going to look at a place that doesn't have good quality schools. Those are a couple examples.
All right,
But there's
thanks,
way more
Nolan.
that you can go into on where people decide to live.
And I agree.
Actually,
I
Nolan,
agree with you.
Yeah.
that was kind of where I was going to go with my question. You mentioned Oklahoma City. I've heard of Santa Fe. I've heard of a number of jurisdictions. I believe Austin. I've heard of a number of jurisdictions that have made investments that seem to be paying off with increased interest and growth. You say you were just in Oklahoma City. Can you do a little bit deeper dive into the kind of things you saw? Again, that were attracting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think so in Oklahoma City's case, they had they did this really interesting thing where they collect a 3% sales tax that the people of the city vote on and voted for, that like to raise our sales taxes by 3%, and then we're going to take all that money is going to go into this special pot, and it's going to be used to build this slate of projects. And the people, so when the people vote on it, they're voting on the tax and the projects to be built. And so the first time that they did that, it included things like a baseball stadium and entertainment district area, and they have this like canal through part of the town, through part of the city center that has businesses and shops along it. And it was amazing how people there, like even like the Uber drivers or people that were like the servers in the restaurants and stuff like that, they could all tell you the story of how they collect sales tax to pay for these improvements. And this is not this is a deep red city. This is not a place that normally like raises taxes willy-nilly. This isn't California, right? So it was really interesting to see the kind of community investment and pride that people took in these very visible improvements in their city. And so I think that's one good example. So there's lots of entertainment, lots of fun, good walkable downtown type of area, nice river walk, nice trails, nice parks. Those are the things that were improvements that they did collectively. As an example, not everywhere needs to do the exact same thing. And I know in Alaska we like to do things very differently than places like Oklahoma City. But it's interesting to see some of the philosophies that other places have taken.
Thank you. Now along that same line, we are different. Historically, Alaska has had a high proportion of people working directly for, or their jobs are supported by, government spending at all levels. So that's a peculiarity. Again, it's a resource extraction state. Again, we were heavily reliant on a particular sector. How much do you think that plays into, how much of what we saw, say, from 2015 to 22, do you think was just kind of based on the the state of our legacy industries and the way that they are kind of divvied up among sectors and of course government.
Yeah, I think that the single biggest issue why our economy wasn't doing well was because oil prices were relatively low during that time. We came off a time period of of really high prices and oil, especially like the around the 2010s, early 2010s. Oil prices were riding high, and the big challenge in state government, and you probably were in Juneau in that time, I think, Jomo, that like the big challenge was like, what do we do with all this money, right? It's a different, and then we entered into a different world when prices were low and kind of stayed generally within a low range, for a lot of that time. And that's the single biggest factor there. I think that we have other drivers in our economy, of course. I think that it's interesting. I didn't put this in any of the graphs, but Fairbanks did a little bit better than the state overall during a lot of our recession, our 2015, 2018, 2019 recession. Fairbanks was doing better because of military related construction, right? That tended to boost.
Well, oddly, it was two things, I would say. Yes, the military and the military construction. But the very thing, we stand between the horns of the dilemma once you step outside of the Anchorage Bowl, which is the very thing that helps our economy, harms the state treasury, and that which helps the state treasury harms our economy. So that lower price of oil, if you didn't work for the state and didn't have your job at risk, it was actually pretty nice to finally be able to afford your home heating bills, have a little extra money to invest or save. Plus we had the military.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And that is a really important point for much of the state, that fuel oil and diesel costs are something that have a big influence on the overall economy. I think that so, but to your point though, I think that the federal spending, and especially with the military, I think that's the other big thing that I think is in some ways like right there with oil and gas, not getting as much attention statewide, but I think that's an important one. And I think that we have to be thinking really hard about how we maximize our opportunities as a state, with DoD's Arctic strategies and and other future plans. I think that's an important one. And then I think also there's going to be a lot of mineral development in the state probably too. A lot of critical minerals and other just necessary minerals that are needed in our modern economy that are seeing demand increase. I think that's another one. And then we have a great tourism sector that's growing, and that probably still has a lot of room to continue to grow. And that's important as well. So there are other drivers, but I think that we've just let I think oil has been one that has really dominated our economy for a long time.
Hey, Mr. Wood, you put a link. Do you just want to go ahead and speak to it?
Good morning, everybody. Just curious in the work and research that he's doing, if he's coming across anybody that's speaking to some of the placemaking efforts. I dropped the link of the USDA just as a summary, but it's certainly not limited to that federal program and those efforts. But in terms of communities and residents and organizations trying to coordinate with one another to make their communities, or to contribute to participating in having their community be someplace, literally be someplace for people to continue to stay or to attract others to come. Alaska is not the only rural place that's been challenged with things, and we are definitely unique in what it is that we face, including the fact that we're, the last frontier. So I'm in speaking with others who have been working with some of the placemaking things, and some others within Alaska who are working with their organizations and their efforts, more of the things around placemaking efforts continue to come up. So along a roundabout way, in the crux of where he's at and everything going on, if he's aware of any other communities or programs and so forth working with that. I deal with a neuro condition, and I can sometimes have a hard time. So I thank you for enduring my speaking here.
Thank you. No, that's an excellent point about, and I have seen this, that USDA Rural Development funding a placemaking initiative. I have seen it a bit. It's smaller, placemaking. The whole idea of making, of improving the livability of communities in all kinds of ways. Downtown revitalization, or upgrading of the the livability elements of a place. I think is something that's really critical and really important. What is it that, and probably something that we've neglected a bit as a state overall. We Alaska's known for kind of more utilitarian thinking, right? Like, okay, let's put some buildings here. It's on a good hill, and then we'll make sure that the lanes are nice and wide so we can plow the snow, and we didn't prioritize things like I don't know, pedestrian walkways or bike lanes or things like that until later, and downtown beautification efforts, and like, do we save some room for some green here? And I there's those kinds of things, the livability pieces, or the ways of improving kind of the physical appearance of a town, being part of that. I think that is a really important effort, to look at. As far as efforts going on in the state, I can't speak to many specifics, but I know that there are various like downtown revitalization types of efforts in Anchorage and in Juneau, and I know that there's been some work done in downtown Fairbanks as well over the years. And so I'm not an expert in those, but there are those types of things. Even places like Kodiak has like a small traditional commercial district that actually has had a lot of businesses close and get boarded up, and a lot of people trying to figure out how to revitalize that recently. There are a lot of towns that are facing that and that are thinking hard about it now.
Just as a quick follow-up, Nolan, I'd like to chat maybe perhaps sometime a little bit more, or with anybody else. I think there's a chance within those conversations that it isn't so much about the pocket parks, or community co-op, theater spaces, or it isn't just limited to those kinds of things, but actually a community exercise of really evaluating what it is that your community has, so that in a sense you're not BSing yourselves, so that when you're making those decisions to move forward with the economic developments, or with infrastructure developments, or when we're talking 10, 15, 20 large bond decisions, with the dynamics of everything now and what it is that we can count on, some of those strategies to really try to look at what's available to you, so that those more imaginative results can come surface from the involvement of the practice of nothing about us without us. So I think there's even more opportunity that allow to get away from the kind of public park, pocket park, downtown revitalization kind of concept, which is great, but I think there's more opportunity for it, especially for the rural environments in Alaska and with our local economies. Thank you.
I think it's a good point.
Ms. Burgraff.
Yeah, well, one of the, you brought up a lot of good points here, but one of the big factors that's affecting this state, as far as the outflow of population, is the fact that the federal government plays a big role in what happens up here. The military has been helpful. If it wasn't for a lot of the military spending now, Fairbanks probably would be in a lot more trouble than it is. But the other factor that we're facing is on the federal scene. We've had an administration that has been opposed to resource development, that believes that it's better for the country to buy minerals and other resource items from foreign countries. And this costs us jobs and opportunities to benefit more. And of course, I think that's been the big factor that has caused the outflow of the population in Alaska. We have, there's the Ambler Road, the fact that Pebble was, they're trying to stop any development there, and other activities trying to stop oil development in the north. So these are factors that need to be looked at pretty carefully. And hopefully, well, I don't know what lies ahead. We'll have to see what happens after the national elections.
Well, I tell you, certainly that slide you had, Nolan, that showed the Fairbanks out migration. That was actually pretty startling because yes, over that same time frame, we did have people coming in. Now, did that include the military, the service members and their families? Those migration
I think it would if they fell in those age ranges. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was pretty startling again, because that would have been worse if it weren't for the military buildup, I guess.
And you can actually see the opposite of that too. The people who are now living in Fairbanks, where they came from before that too. So you could get some information from that too, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, I think some good points there about the kind of the give and take of the federal government, and I think that there it's a very interesting subject how it's there's, on the one hand, there's a big push, by the Biden administration to secure more critical minerals that are needed for, the cobalt and nickel and lithium that are needed for electric vehicles, and rare earth elements that are needed for all kinds of electronic components. And there's a push to try to get those from domestic sources. So there's some encouragement there. But on the other hand, there's all of the regulatory apparatus that makes resource development very difficult. I think that those are two forces like within the same White House right now that are wrestling with each other. It is always one of the things that I always do need to point out, like to audiences, is that a lot of our problem, especially when it comes to oil development, a lot of our problem is not federal regulation as much. I mean, some of it is, but a lot of it is also market conditions, that a lot of companies are not really wanting to they're trying to preserve their capital discipline. They're trying not to overextend their investments into too many places, and a lot of times the new sources of oil in Alaska are kind of risky investments that the investors themselves don't really like to see, and that's part of what you see going on with less with less activity happening for exploration than we might like. So it's not always about the federal overreach part, but also about what some of those companies are looking for as far as like a relatively shorter return on investment and a less complicated or difficult upfront investment to make. But I do think that critical minerals are probably going to be a bbig part of Alaska's development in the next several years. Ambler Mining District has cobalt, one of those rare critical minerals. You've got the I know the Manh Choh development, I know is one that's got some controversy in the Fairbanks area, but you have projects like that. So there's probably going to be a lot more mineral development in the years ahead.
Okay. Well, this has been a great discussion, and it isn't the most happy news, but it's good to know. Yeah, because I mean, for all of us, is trying to figure out how to buck those headwinds to get us back on a brighter path. Well, everybody,
That's your job, Jomo. You're supposed. I can describe these problems and then hand them over to you to fix.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Well, hey, everybody. Again, we're nearing the top of the hour, but we do have a few more minutes. I would open up to final questions. All right. Well, then if there are none. All right, everybody. Well, if I'm not mistaken, I do have a presentation lined up for next week. If I'm not mistaken, it's they've also been in the news a bit of late. It's Alaska Renewables. They had a proposal to do 2 large-scale wind farms, one down close to coastal Alaska and one here in the interior. So again, let me confirm that, but I believe they are the ones who are on our docket for next week. Well, with that, however, I would like to, of course, thank Executive Director Klouda. Thank you again very much for your reporting. Thank you very much for your presentation today. I would invite everybody to go check out the uaced.org. That's ua-ced.org to see some of the reports. And again, just a lot of great information comes out of Alaska CED. So I would go check it out. And I would also get on their mailing list to get the regular updates as they come out. Well, all right, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. Everybody have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next Tuesday for the Energy for All Alaska Task Force.
Thanks, Jomo.